All right, good morning, everyone. Sorry about the late start. That's not cool. Um, but here we are. Here we are. So, how we doing? Ryan,
Yeah.
what's new?
Nothing's new.
Nothing's new?
Yeah.
Just like same
Yeah.
same stuff?
There's music today, so.
There was music today, yeah. How was that? Good, bad?
Yeah, it was good.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it gets a little too quiet in here. Sometimes it's nice to have a little something in the background, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Tej, how we doing back there?
Good.
Yeah? You're like way in the back corner there.
It's the only place with the socket.
Oh, it's the only place. Oh, I guess so, right? There's none on this wall. Okay. If not the laptop, if you do need to plug something in, you can always plug something in up here too. I know you wouldn't be able to look at it, but yeah, you can use the outlets up here if you want to, or there's a power bar, of course. So, yeah. David. So. Why? What's up? What's that?
I'm a bit tired because I slept like a bit late yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're a little bit lower than.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I kind of I need to get to bed earlier, but I can't seem to do it. And so I'm missing like an hour and a half of sleep every night. And
what time you tend to sleep?
well, about 10:30.
10:30?
Yeah.
That's kind of early.
Yeah, but the problem is I need a lot of sleep. I need about 9.25 hours. And so I know that's a little longer than average, but
And when do you wake up?
when does my alarm go off?
Yeah.
My alarm goes off at 6:20.
Oh, so yeah.
Yeah.
That's early.
So if I fall asleep at 11, that's 7.5 hours. But if I need 9.25, I'm missing a good hour and a half every night, which I feel. Yeah. Do you guys know like how long you sleep? Like if you're on holidays or whatever, and do you kind of know how long you sleep if you just no alarms?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah? What do you guys need?
10,
10 or 11?
11. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, but I think it's fixed now, or at least I hope it's fixed now. Yeah, but I mean, sometimes it's just tough to get enough sleep, right? But important, especially during a pandemic, because that's what helps keep us healthy, right? Maybe I'll go home and have a nap. Maybe that would be a good idea. Okay, so let's get started though, because we're kind of late. We're late getting started today, but sometimes that's okay. Yesterday we were talking about critical thinking, and I think most of you have kind of heard this critical thinking thing before, and so maybe I won't. Well, let's see. Some of the online people haven't, so stick with me here. I'll do kind of a shorter version of it. I won't go through everything. Because we were talking about it yesterday, and the idea that we need a way to evaluate what people tell us, right? Because people will ask us to believe various ideas and pieces of information, and we need to be able to figure out if we should believe them or not, right? Are they good, credible information? Is someone making a good argument to us? Or is it crap, right? And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who will feed you garbage and try to get you to believe it, right? And again, sadly, there's a lot of people out there who will believe it, right? And that has pretty significant consequences, right? So we need a way to kind of figure out what we should believe, right? And so I said that we need to be able to figure out if people are making arguments, right? If they're actually trying to convince us of something, or are they just expecting us to accept their opinion? right? Are they just with no backup? And if they are, we shouldn't do it, right? People need to give you a reason to believe something, right? They need to give you evidence to support what they're saying, right? Oh, so Sesame here would agree with me. Sesame would say that you need to evaluate your arguments, right? Or you need to look for arguments in the first place. So yesterday I made this very simple argument to you, right, with a conclusion and premises, and then we evaluated that argument, right? So I said we need premises that logically support the conclusion and premises that are true, right? And so we kind of walked through this argument, and I think we agreed that it's not bad, right? Some of the premises are not ideal, right? Cats are loving animals. Yeah, most cats are, some aren't. Dogs have the better reputation as loving animals, so maybe it's not a great premise. That first premise, yeah, cats on average are cheaper than dogs, but some dogs are quite small, right? So they might be about the same cost to feed as a cat. So I had three premises that logically supported the conclusion, and they're mostly true. Maybe they're not the best ones around, but this kind of argument is difficult to make, right? Because it's really based on just what people like, right? Some people like cats, right? Some people like dogs, right? They like the kind of lifestyle that having a dog brings. And so it's kind of a tough argument to make, and it's not a perfect one. Now, what about this? Some of you have done this before, but that's okay. These are some simple arguments. I'll just do a couple of them. I won't do them all, just so we get the idea here. But these are simple arguments. And what I want you to do is find the premise or premises and find the conclusion. So in the first one we have, because assault rifles, so assault rifles are the ones that go brrrr, because assault rifles have no peaceful civilian use, the Canadian government should ban assault rifles. So what are we being asked to believe here?
Assault rifles have no peaceful use.
That's true. They have no peaceful use. They are saying that. Are we being asked, is that the conclusion or a premise?
No conclusion.
Okay. This is the conclusion, okay? Assault rifles have no peaceful civilian use. As good critical thinkers, we should ask ourselves, well, why should we believe that? Well, because the Canadian government should ban assault rifles. Okay, want to take another crack at it?
Is the premise?
That's the premise. What's the conclusion?
Canadian government should ban it.
Canadian government should ban assault rifles. Really? Why should they ban assault rifles?
Because assault rifles have no peaceful use.
They have no peaceful civilian use. Yeah. That question will unlock a lot of things for you, right? If you think you have the conclusion, ask yourself the question and see if there are premises that support it, right? If it doesn't work, like we just tried it there, it didn't work. Either we've got the wrong conclusion, right? We've got it jumbled around, or the person's not really making an argument at all, right? So always ask yourself, why should I believe that? Okay. What about number 3 here? When Joseph takes the bus, he's always late. And he's taking the bus today, so I'm sure he's going to be late. What's the conclusion? What are we being asked to believe?
The conclusion is Joseph is going to be late.
Yes, the conclusion is that Joseph is going to be late today, right? And again, ask yourself, why should I believe that? Why should we believe that? Because when Joseph takes the bus, he is always late, and today he is on the bus, right? So we have 2 premises. Always late when he's on the bus. Today he's on the bus. Therefore, Joseph is going to be late today, right? The last one we'll do here, number 4. So wow, again, this is a bit of a dated example, but wow, this movie is on iTunes, was never shown in theaters. It's not a good sign when a movie goes straight to iTunes without ever being shown in theaters. It must be pretty bad, right? So what are we being asked to believe here? Ryan, what are we being asked to believe?
The movie must be bad.
The movie is bad, right? Good. That's the conclusion. Why should we believe that?
Because it never went to the theaters.
Never went to theaters?
It never went to theaters first.
Yeah.
So it's not a good sign.
No, right. It never went to theaters. It went straight to iTunes, and when that happens,
It's not a good sign.
not a good sign, right? So we've got 2, maybe 3 premises there, right? What about this? Is this an argument? Is this an argument? David's kind of looking at it out of the side of his eye there. Is it an argument?
No.
Not really, right? We just have a collection of statements here. They're all talking about defense spending, right? But they're not really trying to convince you of anything, right? They're not trying to prove anything to you. But we can make this an argument, right? Now, if this is an argument, which it is, what's the conclusion here? What are we being asked to believe?
The Canadian government canceled the
Yeah, the Canadian government should cancel these projects. It should not buy these things, right? Why should we believe that? Because
It's more than 50 million.
right, because the Auditor General says that weapons that cost more than 50 million will impair our readiness. What else? The jet is 650. The bombers 1.2 billion, right? Both more than $50 million. And what about our military readiness? Should we impair it? Should we hurt our military readiness?
No.
No, we should not, right? So here we actually have an argument. This is trying to convince us that we shouldn't buy these things, right? Expensive weapons aren't good for our military readiness, and both of these weapons are expensive, right? Way more expensive than that $50 million limit, right? Last one here. Is this an argument? Alicia goes to the bank to get a bank statement of her checking account. Again, this is a million years ago when people had to do this. The teller told her that her balance was $125. Alicia was shocked that it was so low. She called her brother to see if he was pranking her, and he wasn't. Finally, she concluded she had been a victim of bank fraud. Is it an argument? No, why not?
She's not blaming.
She's not blaming anyone, right? That's true. Again, the secret is in the question, right? Why should we believe it? If this was an argument, what would the conclusion be, do you think? If it was an argument, what's the conclusion? What are we being asked to believe?
That she's part of the bank.
Yeah, that she's a victim of bank fraud, right? Why should we believe that? Right? That's the magic question. Why should we believe that? Well, she went to the bank and she had a balance of $125. Does that mean she's a victim of bank fraud? No, right? She's shocked that her bank balance is so low. Is that evidence of bank fraud? No, right? We're all shocked at our bank balance every time we look. Her brother wasn't pranking her. Does that mean that she's a victim of bank fraud? No, right? So it's not really an argument, right? Because it's not really giving us any reasons to believe this thing. It's a little story about Alicia going to the bank, but it's not trying to convince us of anything, right? It's not trying to prove anything to us. And when we ask it to give us evidence, right? Why should we believe this thing? It just doesn't work, right? There's nothing there, right? And so, again, that question is magic, right? It will either tell you that you've got the conclusion right or wrong, or if you're sure about the conclusion, it'll show you that the person's not making an argument at all, right? They're not giving you any reason to believe this. They can believe it, right? Alicia certainly believes it, but it doesn't mean that we should. Okay. So I'm going to leave that for now. On yesterday, I had you read a section of the textbook, and I believe, so the section of the textbook talked about the end of the war, right? The fact that Russia left because they were just spent, right? They had no more money, no more weapons, no more food. They were done, right? They had a revolution in which communists took power, and communists negotiated the Russians out of the war, right? At a similar time, the U.S. joins the war, right? We know that the Germans tried to get the Mexicans to attack the United States to distract them. That annoyed the Americans, and so they wage war on Germany. And again, that kind of brings an end to the war, right? Because Germany's not really able to produce anymore anyway, and now that the US is part of the Allied response, they can't outproduce the US, right? They're just too strong. They just have too much ability to produce things. So the Germans time out, stop fighting, and the idea is to start negotiating. But we know that the negotiation of this treaty isn't going to be satisfactory for Germany because they're not part of it, right? They're not really invited to the war, and it's really going to be three of these four guys, right? The French Prime Minister, the American President, and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, right? We said that these three leaders had different approaches to what they wanted. George Clemenceau from France wanted to punish Germany and make sure that Germany was too weak to ever cause a problem again. We know that David Lloyd George had to deal with a British public who agreed with George Clemenceau, but also David Lloyd George was worried about making Germany too weak, right? Russia had just had a communist revolution, and if Germany was too weak, they were worried that there might be a communist revolution in Germany as well. And we can deal with the details of that a little bit later. And then there was Woodrow Wilson, right, who, from the United States, he had a 14-point plan. That was why they got into the war in the first place, in order to accomplish these 14 things. And so he tried to get as many of those things into the Treaty of Versailles as he could, right? But we also said when he got home, the United States government wasn't too interested in that agreement. They didn't approve it. They didn't join the League of Nations. They went and made their own peace treaty with Germany with no agreement, just saying, we're not fighting you, you're not fighting us, it's over, right? So they didn't sign on to this treaty that Woodrow Wilson had fought so hard for and negotiated so hard for, which is that's kind of too bad for him, right? It's a lot of work, and it was probably a dream, for him to get these things done, and they just didn't happen, right? As for the Germans, we know that the Germans were not super happy with the result of the Treaty of Versailles, right? They didn't get to negotiate it, and then they just had to sign it, right? They had no choice. And so Yeah, sometimes not sometimes, but you saw stuff like this appear in the papers, right? Angry, angry articles saying, you know, we're going to get our revenge, right? We're going to come back stronger than before, and we're going to take our rightful place as a powerful country in Europe. You just wait. You just watch, right? And again, if you know anything about history, you'll know that Germany will be back, right? There will be a sequel to this World War One, unfortunately. Yeah, and so again, lots of text here on the screen, but the idea here is that the Germans felt that they got screwed over, right? They didn't really lose the war. Nobody conquered them, nobody beat them. They simply said, hey, let's stop fighting and work out a deal, right? And instead, they got a deal handed to them in which they had to take responsibility for the war and pay a bunch of repayments and lose their entire military and their territory in Europe and their overseas colonies, right? So they really got penalized for something that I think we agreed yesterday wasn't really their fault, right? Or at least if it was their fault, they shared fault with other nations, right? So let's see here. Right. So when Europe emerges from World War II, the Treaty of Versailles is signed, the war is over, but Europe itself is in a pretty weak situation, a pretty weak state, okay? Many European countries are bankrupt, they have no money left. As it turns out, fighting a war where you just have to produce and produce and produce, turns out that's really expensive, right? So people's bank accounts or countries' bank accounts are empty, right? That's not good. Many people are dead, right? So 65 million people were mobilized. They were active in the war effort. And they might have lost about 10 million young men your age or a little bit older. 10 million people are dead. 20 million are wounded, right? Maybe blinded, maybe missing arms or legs, maybe they can't walk now, right? And so think about that, how big an impact that is on a country, right? Most countries, what they kind of rely on is they rely on you. They rely on young people, right? Because you guys go through school, you're kind of, well, you're not quite at the end, but you're getting there. You come out of school, you get jobs, right? You get jobs, careers, you start to work your way up, you start paying taxes, maybe you buy cars, maybe you buy a condo or a home, you buy groceries, you have a family and you start providing for the family, right? Or countries kind of rely on this economically for each new generation to kind of step forward and start economically producing, right? Working at jobs, generating things, and paying taxes and buying things, cars, houses, food, vacations, all of that stuff. But what happens when basically an entire generation disappears, right? All of those young men that were supposed to get a job and start a family and buy a house, they're all gone. They're all dead, right? And so imagine, on a social kind of perspective, that's awful, right? Everyone would have known someone who died. But in an economic kind of context, that's not good for a country, right? Especially a country that's bankrupt after the war. Now they're kind of missing an entire generation of people who are normally contributing to the economy. Those people are gone, right? So that's not good either, right? Even though, it is awful to lose that many people, but in an economic sense, it's not good either. Right? It's a problem. there's also problems with infrastructure, right? So entire areas of northern France, of kind of West Germany, of other places in Europe have just been bombed into oblivion, right? So roads are destroyed, telegraph poles are destroyed, ports are destroyed, railway lines are destroyed, farmers' fields are destroyed, their livestock are all dead. And again, if you want to get back to normal, if you want to start getting your economy going and getting people to work and producing, well, how are you going to do that with roads that are all blown up and railways that are blown up and no telegraph lines, right? And farmers' fields that are just covered in holes and ammunition shells and dead bodies, right? There's a lot of work to be done to just restore some level of basic infrastructure, right? And that has to happen too, right? Especially for places like North France, where a lot of this stuff has been destroyed, right? So, yeah, you can see, you know, this probably used to be a forest, I imagine. It looks pretty bleak and awful now, right? And you can imagine huge sections of land looking like this, right? Just wrecked, right? And again, that's going to take a long time to regenerate and to fix. And in the meantime, these countries have to try to get on with their life, right? And get their economies going. And there's a lot of damage that needs to be fixed, right? I don't know how well you can see that, but this is a town in France before the war and after, right? So this is Rue Saint Martin in Amiens, France. Sorry. Looks like a little postcard. Looks pretty cute, right? Looks like a cute little town. But as you can see, after the war, it's been just completely destroyed, right? All of that needs to be cleaned and rebuilt and made safe again for people. Massive amounts of damage, right? So there's a lot of destruction that's happening, but in these kind of short 4 years, the world has changed quite a bit, right? Europe has, you know, lost an entire generation of young men. The entire map of Europe has been redrawn. Technology has taken a huge jump forward, right? Which again, war is kind of good for that, right? It's good for getting technological advances. Social kind of norms have changed, right? We read about the British home front where, you know, the kinds of things people were doing had changed. Women had entered the workforce. It's kind of a new world that these people are emerging into, right? Whether they kind of like it or not. I just wanted to watch this really short video. It's only about 4 minutes long or so, or 5 minutes long. And it just talks a little bit about what I've just been saying here, is the kind of the legacy of World War I, right? So what the kind of historical effect of it is, okay? So I just, sorry, I'm opening the wrong thing here. For online people, I'll just put the link here into the live chat so you can watch it. And again, it's just a couple minutes long, no big deal, but I just thought it might be useful to illustrate what we're talking about here. Okay, so the link is in Microsoft Teams. Let's just go watch the video and then we'll come right back, okay? Let's see.
Summarizing the legacy of World War I in a word is difficult, but the word I use would be paradox. Because here was a tremendous opportunity for the world to learn. about some of the dangerous mistakes that helped to lead to that war. And yet what we saw over the course of the 20th century in many ways was the replication of those same errors again and again and again.
What World War I gave us was this legacy of inquiry of how to make war more effective, better, but ultimately, and with horrible consequences, much bloodier.
It changed the world forever because of the Second World War and the fact that Germany was left unchecked. Germany was able to build up its armaments even though it was told, as a country, you need to cut back on your navy, you need to cut back on your army, your aircraft, and so forth. And so really the legacy is that it led to a second and more costlier war.
I think the legacy of the First World War for America is not only about our place in the world, but also about how America itself is transformed, and in particular, the relationship between Americans and the federal government. Coming out of the First World War, the federal government is much larger, more powerful, and everyday Americans who had experienced the draft, who had experienced food conservation, who had experienced the mobilization of their labor during the war, understood that Uncle Sam had significant powers.
The world had a tremendous opportunity in 1918 to ferret out those things that were dividing people. Our failure to deal with those issues, to have self-determination, or allow people to talk about that, certainly will be a contributing factor in Vietnam, certainly will be a contributing factor as we talk about the world today and we look at the Middle East. A lot of those problems, a lot of those issues politically that we failed to address in substantive ways in World War I continue to haunt us to this day.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, so interesting, right? So again, we do know, I think most of us already know that fact, right? Is that, we have this First World War, and, the idea was, let's never have this again, right? Let's never have another global conflict. But of course we know that we do. We have a World War II just 20 years later, right? Which is kind of a bit of a defeat. But I like what that last historian was saying. Actually, I'm just going to go like this. I like what that last historian was saying, right? He was like, we have these, the biggest legacy of World War I is that the problems that came up in that war are things that we didn't really solve, right? And they led to another war 2 decades later, and they continue. Cool, right? I just go off into infinity. They continue to be a problem for us today, right? And he says it's that idea of self-determination, right? If we have a group of people who want to rule themselves, can we just let them, right? If the Serbians want to rule themselves, can't we just give them their own country and let them do that? Is that just funny? Is it?
Yeah,
It is?
it kind of,
Is it distracting? Like every time I move?
there is going.
Okay. Okay, hang on. There, maybe no, I can't. Okay. There, so maybe it's not so distracting. But that's kind of what he's saying, right? And he says those problems, those issues continue to haunt us to today. And he gives the issue of the Vietnam War, which we'll get to a little bit later. But even what's happening between Russia and Ukraine right now? Right now.
Russia is trying to take over Ukraine.
Well, it kind of looks that way, right? It kind of looks like Russia will invade Ukraine. And if they do, it looks like they may take control of the country. Now, do the Ukrainians want this to happen?
No.
No, they do not, right? And so here we are, right? Where are we, 104 years later, or whatever it is, over 100 years later, and it's the same issue. Ukraine wants to be an independent country, and they want to do what Ukrainians want to do. They don't want to be told what to do by Russia. And what's Russia saying? No, sorry, we want you to do what we want you to do. We want to be in control of you, right? It's the same thing. Austria-Hungary was the same thing with Serbia, right? Serbia said, we want to rule ourselves. We want Serbians to make decisions for Serbians. Austria-Hungary was like, no, not going to happen. We own you. We're going to make the decisions, right? It's the exact same thing, and we haven't figured it out yet, right? We haven't found a way to properly address this because we're still having the same problem, even right to today, right? This is happening now, right this minute, right? We're having the same kind of issue, right? The same issue with nationalism and who gets to make decisions for who. Is it Ukraine? Does Ukraine get to make decisions for Ukrainians, or does Russia?
Ukraine.
Well, I'm glad you feel that way, but I don't know how it's going to go, right? In another few months, we may have a different answer to that, right? Not by what we want, but what actually happens.
But why does this bother the US?
Why does it bother the U.S.?
Yeah.
Russia maybe taking over Ukraine?
Yeah.
Well, what do you think?
Expand.
Russia will expand? Yeah. Well, and that's a good question. Why should we care if a country like Russia takes over a country like Ukraine? I don't think any of us I know we have at least one Russian listening in, but why should we be concerned if Russia takes control of Ukraine? Why should we worry about that? Or should we worry about it?
But I feel like the more other countries worry about it, the more other countries start to fight with each other.
Right. It kind of sets maybe a precedent, right? Do you say the more we worry about it?
Yeah.
So like if we don't worry about it, it'll be better?
If you don't get involved in it, it's better to stay off.
Yes, right. So definitely if we don't, this is World War I, right? The U.S. what the U.S. decided. Europe started fighting with itself in World War I. The Americans looked over and said, you know what? That's their problem. We don't want any part of that. But is that a good choice? Certainly they stayed out of it, and that was good, although they got sucked in toward the end. But should we be concerned that one country has just decided that they want to control another country? Should other countries stand up and help? Should they tell Ukraine, you know what, you guys are on your own, good luck? Do we have a responsibility here? I mean, it certainly would be easier to ignore it.
I think countries in that continent should be bothered, but not countries in other continents.
Okay, so you think it should be more of a geographic thing, right?
Yeah.
People in the area should have maybe more involvement, but us over here, maybe we shouldn't?
Yeah.
Okay. David, what do you think? Hey, Bijan.
Hi.
We're just talking about Russia and Ukraine.
Wow.
Yeah.
Russia and Ukraine.
Yes.
Wish I could join you.
It's tense.
Is it? Are they going to attack?
It looks that way.
Yeah.
We were just talking about the idea of what should be our role? Should we care? Should we intervene? Should we leave them to figure out their own stuff? How should we feel about that?
As individuals or as a nation?
Probably as a nation, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Canada.
As Canada, how should Canada approach this?
Well, Canada is a member of the UN, of the NATO, right?
Yeah.
And as a member of NATO, its position is determined by NATO, basically.
Yeah.
In addition to this situation, it's not like every individual country within NATO decides how to approach it. They approach it as a group, right, as a NATO.
True, but
And
NATO
it's
had.
taking a very, very active role in that.
NATO is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
We
Hey,
just had
Kenny.
a conference last week with Russia,
Yeah.
trying to, convince them not to attack.
Yeah.
But the Russians are saying they're not gonna attack. They've said it. They said publicly, they're saying we're not attacking, we're just here in case something happens. But their requirement for withdrawing is for a guarantee from NATO that Ukraine will not add Ukraine. No, that Ukraine will not join NATO.
Yeah.
That's what they want, and the West is not willing to give that assurance. So.
Yeah. Well, and we've also seen in World War I that, when people build a bunch of weapons just in case, those weapons tend to get used sooner or later.
Yeah, except the worst nuclear bombs, the more powerful ones that have been developed in the last 7 years, they haven't been used yet.
That's true.
They've been tested but not used.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. We can all keep our fingers crossed. Anyways,
Hey.
thanks for letting me.
Hey, always.
On this is fun.
Always.
Wish I could join you guys. Anyway, see you later.
See you, Bijan. Yeah, so NATO's involved as well, but yeah, it's a complicated situation, right? What should we be done? What should be done? Is it our business? Should we care? If we should care, why should we care? What should we do? Right? Should we simply say this is unacceptable? Should we do something about it? Yeah, but it is interesting how, again, it's the same issue, right? It's the same thing all over again. Even though the details are different, the countries are different, we still have one country, one area that wants to do what it wants, and we have another country who wants to have control of that, right? Same thing. Okay, you guys want to take a little break? Cool. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I think we'll deal with the League of Nations, the newly formed League of Nations. Okay? All right. All right, and we are back. So we've come to the end of World War One. We've kind of come to the end of the 1910s as well, right? So we're kind of entering a new decade. We're entering the 1920s. We're entering a new decade, a new historical period, a new world, right? A post-war world where countries and economies are trying to rebuild themselves and kind of recover from this sort of collective trauma that everyone has experienced. And the 1920s are kind of an interesting time. We won't deal with it too much today, probably more tomorrow, but the 20s are a wild ride, okay? So, the 1910s, not much is happening. Then, of course, we have the war. But as you get into the 1920s, it starts to get super eventful and wild and crazy, right? So some places are experiencing, economic destruction and it's awful. Some places are making money like crazy. There's dancing, there's drinking, there's new technology that people have access to that they've never had access to before. It is a wild ride, right? And again, if you ever get the chance to go back in time, you might want to consider the 1920s. It's a pretty fun time, especially if you're a young person. It's a blast, right? There's lots of money to be made. There's lots of opportunity. There's lots of jobs. There's lots of fun. It's excellent, right? But we'll get to that in due course. Also, if any, never mind. So, like I said, the legacy of World War I is, of course, a second World War, right? A kind of failure to address the problems that caused the First World War, but also a kind of a legacy of not fixing the same errors, right? And again, those ideas about self-determination and nationalism will continue to come up, right? And will continue to be difficult to solve, right? And again, even right up to the minute today, we're still struggling with, countries and their autonomy, right? But before we go on to deal with all that, before we go on to deal with the 1920s, I want to look at the League of Nations, because the League of Nations is, and actually I'm gonna modify this here in a second. I'm gonna modify this because the League of Nations is something that comes out of the Treaty of Versailles. It is the forerunner to the United Nations, and so it's going to be short-lived. Okay, so spoiler alert, it's going to be created and then it's just not gonna last. But it's worth looking at so that we can talk about kind of international responses to things. Okay, so I'll let you read this section from the textbook here, just page 32 to 34, and then a few questions on page 48. For online people, I'm just going to drop this into Microsoft Teams for you. We'll read, we'll answer the questions, and we'll talk as usual, okay? Let me just find the appropriate section here. There we go. Yeah. So as I say, just start with page 32. Don't worry about page 30. Hey, people, maybe just one more minute and then we'll talk. Just one more minute. All right, people. So, a few quick questions here on the short-lived and kind of unimpressive history of the League of Nations, right? So, question number 2 here is, what was the rationale for the League of Nations in the first place? Why was it created?
To stop another war from happening.
Right? And how would it do that? How would it stop another war from happening?
Uniting every force that might start a war, like British, America, France, Germans, Russia, just to make sure, like, yeah, we all are friends, just in case, like that.
Like to come to a compromise together.
Yeah, right. It would kind of unite everyone in one sort of body, right? So if one person was trying to start a war, all the others could kind of band together and stop it, right? It was trying to put everyone on the same team, almost, if you would. Or if one person was not on the team, there was enough strength of everyone else to stop them, right? So yeah, they thought that they could kind of eliminate warfare altogether by creating this body of all nations that, you know, could discuss and agree on things. And if somebody was acting aggressive, you know, the fact that the entire world was against them, that would be enough to stop them, right? And so that was Woodrow Wilson's idea, right? And it says here, I actually missed that detail earlier, but it said that he was willing to actually bargain away all of his other points for this one, right? So this was the one that Woodrow Wilson wanted the most, right? This is the one he was pushing for the hardest. So it's kind of sad, is that, you know, question 2 is what's the rationale for establishing the League of Nations, and it goes right to give 3 reasons for its failure. But what were 3 reasons for its failure? Can you give me one, Ryan?
So it's good for like economic purposes, but not good for stopping wars.
Okay, so it had it had some economic benefits and some social benefits, but why did it fail is what I'm asking. Why did it ultimately not work? I'm going to come back to you in a second. David, do you have one thing for me? Why was the League of Nations a failure? Okay, I'm coming back to you too. Kenny?
Well, first, they don't really have a strong root or strong force to stop people getting out of the league.
Right.
Like, they more like some kind of parties. You want to come, then you come. You want to go, then you go. Then they have like if you want to start a war, just get out of the league and then just fight with someone inside the league, and the others don't have to help if you're not inside the union.
Yeah.
Right?
The rules are kind of soft, right? Like you just
Too soft to
yeah.
solve wars.
Yeah, so you volunteer to join, and then if you don't like what the league is saying, then you just bail and do whatever you want, right? It's not that's not very helpful, right? What did you say about well, I'll come back here. Brian, do you have another one for me? So yeah, the voluntary membership is one for sure. A second failure, or second reason for failure.
The main things I think that unions isn't good enough is they didn't really grab the biggest force to join the National League, because Russia and United States is joining it not right after it become a thing. They started thinking, oh, people are joining it, so I'm gonna have to join it to just make sure I don't have isolated.
Yeah.
And then they have two biggest armies on the world, and they don't even take cares about you. So what would you expect others to do? So I want to start a war and I just go. They don't even care, so why should I?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's probably an added thing I think that you're implying there, Kenny, is the idea that when it is apparent to people that it doesn't work, people lose faith in it, and they don't really kind of invest in it because they know, well, it doesn't work, right? And that's another point, right? Is that probably the most powerful country in the world at the time, the United States, didn't join, right? They went off and they're like, no, we're going to do our own thing. You guys have fun with your League of Nations, right? So the strongest country in the world didn't join it, right? And the Soviet Union, when the League was formed, the Soviet nation wasn't really powerful, but it became so later, right? And it joined then, but still, the absence of the most powerful country in the world, it's kind of a problem, right, to not have them there. One more, or maybe two more. One more reason why the League was kind of a failure.
Maybe because it's unstable.
Because it's unstable?
Yeah.
In what way?
So everyone had their own personal decisions.
Oh yeah, okay. That's true, right? Every country was probably there, arguing its own interests, for sure. But we also read that some countries kind of went outside, right? So countries like Britain and France used the League of Nations when it worked for them. And I think this is maybe what you were saying too, Kenny. But when it didn't work for them, they just kind of went off and did their own thing, right? And so if it was convenient for them, they used the League. If it wasn't convenient, they just went off and did whatever they wanted, right? And again, that's not super useful either, right? If people are just going to participate in the League when they feel like it, right? That doesn't really work. There's a voting issue too. What do they say about voting?
I think the primary members can just say, I don't care, I don't make this, and then just can ban the vote of the decisions.
Yeah, they can. So if you're a permanent member of the council, you have a veto, right? What's a veto?
Vote to stop voting.
Kind of, yeah. It's actually a Latin word, comes from the Roman Republic, and veto is the Latin for I forbid, right? I forbid this to happen. And so when you veto, you basically stop something from happening, right? So if everyone on the council votes, we're going to do this, one country can say, I veto, right? So you can't make anyone do something, but you can keep them from doing something. You can stop them, right? And so here Japan uses their veto because they've invaded part of China. The Security Council wants to do something, and Japan says, we veto. So you can't do it, right? So that's kind of a problem, right? But there's another voting issue too. It's in the assembly. I think it's in the assembly. It said all votes had to be, started with a U. All votes had to be I think it's on page. Oh yeah, it's on page 33. And it's in the first paragraph. Voluntary membership, which we mentioned. The need for a unanimous vote. What does unanimous mean? When something's unanimous, it means that everybody agrees, right? So for anything to pass, for anything to be put into practice, everybody had to agree on it. Do you think that's reasonable with 60 countries? Do you think they're all going to agree on anything?
No.
No, right? That's ridiculous. That's why most of the time when we vote, it's majority, right? Whatever the majority says, that's what we do. If you're trying to get a unanimous vote, it's darn near impossible, right? People don't agree on anything. And if you can get more than half of people to agree on something, you're having a good day, right? To try and get everyone to agree to something, no, right? What's that? Yeah, right? Even if we did a vote and say, hey, is murder wrong? Even that wouldn't be unanimous, right? There'd always be some people be like, well, sometimes I'm really annoyed by people. And like you just can't get everyone to agree on anything, right? You need, you need a majority, right? And so in most places, this is the last thing I'll say because we're almost out of time. In most places where you vote, you either need a majority, right? So 50 plus 1, you need more than half of the people to vote. And sometimes you need 2/3. So if it's a really important vote, sometimes it's a 2/3 majority that you need. But unanimous? Nothing's unanimous. And I can say that here because you probably don't know this, but Columbia College is actually a democracy. So we're run by all of our members, so all of the teachers and staff are members of this society, and the big decisions we vote on. And I can tell you from experience that almost nothing is unanimous, right? When we vote, it's by majority because there's always a few people who will disagree for whatever reason. And again, if you, like with the league here, if you try to have unanimous voting, nothing ever happens, right? You can never decide anything because there's always one person who'll be like, oh, I don't know. And then the proposal fails, right? And you can't do anything. So it's kind of a flaw in the design of the league here. So yeah, this voluntary membership, these countries kind of participating when they want and then going off and doing what they want if the league doesn't work for them, entering and leaving when they want, the voting system, the fact that they don't have any military force, right? They can't actually, they can't back up their words with military force. Yeah, so they have it's got no teeth, right? The league has no teeth. So yeah, there's kind of lots of things. It's a great idea, right? But it just doesn't really work. Okay, that's all for today. We're out of time. Tomorrow we'll review this very quickly. Then we'll talk about the roaring 1920s. It's a blast.
Again.
The 20s is a blast again?
No, I'm just studying the roaring 20s again.
Oh, have you done that before?
Last semester.
Oh, okay. So you'll be like our expert.
No, I won't. But
Awesome.
I forgot some stuff.
Oh, okay. Review then. Okay, see you tomorrow, guys.